Good morning and welcome to Daily 15. It's good to have you back. Today's Daily 15 is titled Strawson on Resentment, and it comes from an essay called Freedom and Resentment by P.F. Strawson. In it, he explores a chestnut of a philosophical question, namely the debate over free will. But he comes at this debate from a different and unique angle, asking what our emotions like resentment, anger, and love can tell us about it. If you'd like to read along with us, you can head to alifeofthought.com/d15 to read the annotations yourself, or head on over to community.alifeofthought.com to join the conversation. Remember, what I say here is not supposed to be the last or final word. It's supposed to be the first one. So join me and say a few in between. We'll get started with our first paragraph. Strawson begins. Let us consider then occasions for resentment, situations in which one person is offended or injured by the action of another, and in which, in the absence of special considerations, the offended person might naturally or normally be expected to feel resentment. Then let us consider what sorts of special considerations might be expected to modify or mollify this feeling or remove it altogether. It needs no saying how multifarious these considerations are, but for my purpose, I think they can be roughly divided into two kinds. To the first group belong all those which might give occasion for the employment of such expressions as he didn't mean to, he hadn't realized, he didn't know, and also all those which might give occasion to the phrase, he couldn't help it, when this is supported by such phrases as he was pushed, he had to do it, it was the only way, they left him no alternative, etc. Obviously, these various phrases and the kinds of situations in which they would be appropriate differ from each other in striking and important ways. But for my present purpose, they have something still more important in common. None of them invites us to suspend judgment towards the agent, either at the time of his action or in general our ordinary reactive attitudes. They do not invite us to view the agent as one in respect of whom these attitudes are in any way inappropriate. They invite us to view the injury as one in respect of which a particular one of these attitudes is inappropriate. They do not suggest that the agent is in any way an inappropriate object of that kind of demand for goodwill or regard which is reflected in our ordinary reactive attitudes. They suggest instead that the fact of the injury was not in this case incompatible with that demand's being fulfilled, that the fact of injury was quite consistent with the agent's attitude and intentions being just what we demand they should be. The agent was just ignorant of the injury he was causing, or had lost his balance though being pushed, or had reluctantly to cause the injury for reasons which acceptably override his reluctance. The offering of such pleas by the agent and their acceptance by the sufferer is something in no way opposed to or outside the context of ordinary interpersonal relationships and the manifestation of ordinary reactive attitudes. Since things go wrong and situations are complicated, it is an essential and integral element in the transactions which are the life of these relationships. Talk about a tongue twister, but with that being said, we'll jump right into our highlighted phrase. This one comes at the beginning. Strawson says, expected to feel resentment. Before even getting into the context of today's excerpt, it's important that we start with a definition. Namely, in thinking about today's excerpt, we're going to see references to feelings, resentment or anger, but maybe even their counterparts. Talk of forgiveness and love. In talking about reactive attitudes, Strawson means to speak about those feelings and reactions of ours which we come to, or which, quote unquote, depend on or involve our beliefs about the attitudes and intentions of others. So he's going to use this word, reactive attitudes. He's just talking about these feelings. That's all. He gives the example a little bit earlier in the essay, quote, if someone treads on my hand accidentally while trying to help me, the pain may be no less acute than if he treads on it in contemptuous disregard of my existence, or with a malevolent wish to injure me. But I shall generally feel, in the second case, a kind and degree of resentment when he has a malevolent wish to injure me. I'll feel a kind and degree of resentment that I shall not feel in the first. Such feelings may initially seem normal, common, unproblematic, and therefore pretty odd to take as objects of philosophical inquiry. But once we get a handle on what Strawson is trying to do in the paper, our underlined phrase, it's going to make a little bit more sense. So we'll move right on along then to our underlined phrase. Strawson says, let us consider what sorts of special considerations might be expected to modify or mollify this feeling, our reactive attitude, or remove it altogether. Now, to understand why, so Strawson's not just talking about excuses here, and his point is pretty philosophically important. To understand why that is, it's important to understand the context of this paragraph. Strawson, in the paper, is weighing in on the debate in philosophy over what philosophers call determinism. Now, it's hard to say what exactly the determinist claim is, but the core idea is that we lack a free will, and that should mean something to you already, even if we can't say exactly what it is to lack a free will. And because we're not free, because our choices are determined, not by us, but they're determined, there is a worry then that if this theory is true, if determinism is true, then we cannot be morally responsible. After all, this much seems intuitive. How can I be held morally to account for something I didn't freely choose to do? Now, in philosophy, there are two camps in response to this question. Strawson calls one camp the optimists. According to him, these people think that even if determinism is true, even if we don't have free will, not everything is lost. After all, they will say, concepts of responsibility play important social roles in shaping people's behavior. It's important that people feel ashamed for doing the wrong thing, and just insofar as we're conditioning the public, it's important to punish people, right? That's like, shocking the animal so it doesn't do the thing that we don't want it to do. So there's a pragmatic benefit, says the optimist. And the optimist, unsurprisingly, is going to be contrasted with the pessimist. And the pessimists are people who feel that unless we have a free will, things like punishment or blame or concepts of good and bad, i.e. good or bad people, simply don't have any application. That these concepts don't have an application to beings who do not act freely. If we're not free, it couldn't be that someone deserves the punishment they're going to get because they didn't choose freely the decision that they're being punished for. Now, normally, the group of people Strawson calls the optimists try to get out of the problem of our lacking a free will by saying that you don't need a free will to be punishable or to be blamed, right? They say it simply suffices that you weren't coerced, that you weren't forced to do the bad thing. If you rob a store, for example, regardless of whether or not your will is free, whatever the heck that means, right? The optimist says, look, you deserve to go to jail unless someone put a gun to your head and told you to rob the store. That is the only important kind of freedom that there is. And clearly, there's a difference between being determined, i.e. someone puts a gun to my head and tells me to rob the store, and someone who wakes up one morning, says, I'm going to rob this grocery store, and does it. The optimist says that difference is enough to justify punishment and blame and resentment in one case, namely the case in which there's no gun to your head. But the pessimists are not at all satisfied by this. They want to know why we should care about the lack of coercion at all. According to them, the important thing seems to be that either way, our will isn't free in the first place, right? If determinism is true, then we lack a free will. So they want to ask, why are we even bothering talking about punishment? The bottom line is that the pessimists feel that this kind of freedom, the freedom of not being coerced, is empty, that it's unsatisfying, and that it's missing something. Strawson wants to find out what it is that's missing, why the pessimist isn't convinced, and to do that, he wants to turn to a place we're a bit more at home in, namely our personal relationships, and specifically to what we've called our reactive attitudes. Strawson's hope, then, is that if we look closely at these reactive attitudes, we can find out the sorts of things that take away from them, that prevent us from being able to blame or resent or get mad at someone like we normally do, like is normal in the context of a human relationship. When do we lose the right to resent someone? And why do we lose that right? If we can answer that question, maybe we'll be able to settle the debate between the optimist and the pessimist. We'll be able to say whether our lacking a free will takes away the things that we need to resent or blame people. And if we find that our lacking a free will does not deprive us of this thing, Strawson is going to suggest that considering these reactive attitudes will show us why the optimist's response feels so unsatisfying. And that leaves us with our circled phrase. None of them invites us to suspend judgment towards the agent, either at the time of his action or in general, our ordinary reactive attitudes. They do not invite us to view the agent as one in respect of whom these attitudes are in any way inappropriate. So in this paragraph, Strawson is considering one group of cases in response to which we suspend our normal reactive attitudes, i.e., we hold off from blaming or resenting, getting mad at a person. And specifically, this is the set of cases we're perhaps most familiar with as cases in which a person doesn't know what they were doing. But Strawson makes an important point that recognizing failures of this kind, failures of the kind that we describe as a person who doesn't know what he's doing, a person who didn't realize what was happening to him, a person who was pushed, a person who didn't know, a person for whom it was the only way, it was the only choice he had. Now, failures of this kind, accidents or cases in which a person is forced, it does not prevent, these failures do not prevent us from thinking about said person as a moral agent. We're still able to think of them as someone who could be blamed. If in these cases we hold off on our resentment or anger towards them because we recognize that they couldn't help it, we still continue to think of them as someone who could be blamed, who could be resented. In this case, we simply hold off on blaming them because in this one, they couldn't help it. But of course, this implies that as a general possibility, helping it is something they can do. Normally, there's someone who can be blamed, someone who can be resented. This is more of an exception. This point, I think, falls in favor of the optimist's view. After all, if determinism's being true amounts to everyone simply not being able to help what they were doing in the same way that we say of someone, oh, he couldn't help what they were doing, it wouldn't prevent us from thinking about people still as agents. Rather, such a picture would leave us able to understand the person's actions and choices as potential candidates for blame or resentment or anger. And for instance, if they continue to make the same mistake, if they continue doing the thing they supposedly couldn't help, we might actually start to resent them for it. And that leaves us with paragraph 2. And in this second paragraph, just to give a quick little preface, Strawson is going to try to talk about this second group of considerations. He begins. The second group of considerations is very different. I shall take them in 2 subgroups, of which the first is far less important than the second. In connection with the first subgroup, we may think of such statements as he wasn't himself, or he has been under very great strain recently, or he was acting under post-hypnotic suggestion. In connection with the second, we may think of he's only a child. He's a hopeless schizophrenic. His mind has been systematically perverted. That's purely compulsive behavior on his part. Such pleas as these do, as pleas of my first general group do not. invite us to suspend our ordinary reactive attitudes towards the agent, either at the time of his action or all the time. They do not invite us to see the agent's action in any way consistent with the full retention of ordinary interpersonal attitudes and merely inconsistent with one particular attitude. Rather, they invite us to view the agent himself in a different light from the light in which we should normally view one who has acted as he has acted. I should not linger over the first subgroup of cases, though they perhaps raise in the short term questions akin to those raised in the long term by the second subgroup. We may dismiss them without considering those questions by taking that admirably suggestive phrase, "he wasn't himself," with the seriousness that, for all its being logically comic, it deserves. We shall not feel resentment against the man he is for the action done by the man he is not, or at least we shall feel less. We normally have to deal with him under normal stresses, so we shall not feel towards him when he acts as he does under abnormal stresses, as we should have felt towards him had he acted as he did under normal stresses. If only we had another 15 minutes. If you'd like to read today's Daily 15 for yourself, head on over to alifeofthought.com/d15, or if you'd like to join the conversation, which we so encourage, head on over to community.alifeofthought.com. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.